Latch the windows, lock the doors, and put the kids to bed. It's time for another episode of
Tales from the Garage!
Here I am, back again, once again, off the cuff. Before I continue on, let me explain that I actually, yesterday morning, bit my tongue very badly, the side back of my tongue while I was eating breakfast. And now it's almost like I've had Novocaine or something similar. I'm actually having some trouble talking, saying certain words. So probably be speaking a little bit slower than normal, which may not be a bad thing. Sometimes I think I just go too fast. I can't now with this tongue bite. It's absolutely ridiculous. It wasn't the front of the tongue, was the side on the back, which is every time you say a word, you don't realize that your tongue's moving and it's constantly like rubbing and irritating. So I kind of feel like I'm coming out of the dentist and the Novocaine hasn't worn off yet or something. A bit odd. Anyway, I thought I would film a video anyway. And hopefully, the slowness of my speech won't cause it to be too overlong. I'll cut it short if it gets too long. And again, this is only my third attempt at recording a video since I had issues with this computer, with the videos not filming, or basically the computer deleting the video as soon as I pressed end record. So I don't know what's going to happen. But it's unusual that I'm filming this in the afternoon. Not typical of me. And I've been a bit reflective and melancholy lately. Nothing new, but maybe more so because we're coming up on the first anniversary of a musician that I've loved very much since 1978. His passing, John Abercrombie. And just within the last few days, a documentary that was filmed just before he passed away. It wasn't even edited or anything at the time he passed away, August of 2017, which is exactly a year ago. And now the documentary is coming out. I haven't seen it yet, but a friend actually purchased a copy and is sending it to me. So I will be seeing it within the next few days. And I guess that's, I've been thinking about that a lot between the anniversary of his passing and the documentary coming out, which is something I've always wanted to see. I want to see that for all of the musicians that I like, but one of the things about Abercrombie in particular, and he's somebody that I've been into since 1978, so it's been a long love affair with his music. I've really wanted to see a documentary on him and see the area where he lives, etc., because he doesn't live that far from me. I want to say where he's lived in New York State is probably within an hour of where I live. Potentially, maybe even a lot less. I don't know. I never did on a map the specific town that he lived in to see how far away he was. But I guess when somebody... and he lived pretty much most of his life in that basic area, or in New York City, which is also very close to me. I like to see a musician's surroundings, where they live, where they create and write and stuff like that. But with him being so close to me, physically, I think that I thought about him maybe a lot more than the musicians that live, say, like in Europe or something like that, which is just like another world to me. And so it was always somebody that, like Jack DeJohnette, who lives in Woodstock, which is not far. Somebody that I always keep my eyes open when I'm out on the highway driving toward New York State to see, is there John Abercrombie in that car, or Jack DeJohnette. I was looking for people that I might know, that I happen to know live in that area, or in this area. So I got to thinking a lot about when I basically got into jazz in '78, around 1978. Nearly all of the musicians that I listened to, and the ones that became my favorite musicians, have all passed away. There's very few that I got into that were already deceased at the time that I got into them. Even though I wasn't necessarily buying new albums, it's not like I was just buying current albums that were newly released at the time. When I jumped into mainstream jazz, I was buying, sessions at that point that were 15 or 20 years old, or even more. And yet, most of those musicians had passed away. What I thought I would do for this video, one in a series, because I'm not going to have time to talk about more than a few musicians. I thought I'd talk about favorite guitarists of mine that have passed away. The first guy, which is no stranger to you that I've spoken about before, is the one guy that I actually got into after he passed away, and that's Wes Montgomery. Even though, strangely enough, when I listen to his music now, I still feel sadness that he's not with us, which usually you wouldn't think that you would have for somebody that had already passed away before you got into them. The interesting thing with Montgomery, who died in 1968, he was recording his last albums right at Rudy Van Gelder's studio here in New Jersey. Many of his last albums, and in fact the last studio albums he made were made here, recorded in '68. His last album was called Road Song, and that was recorded, I think, about a month before he died in 1968. What to say about him? I mean, I love his playing. He's one of those guys I got into only after he passed away, and yet I feel sadness when I listen to his music. This is a twofer. I'm just showing a random kind of selection of albums of his that I have. Not everything. I didn't even bother to pull out CDs or anything. This is the first one I actually ever bought, which is one of my favorite sessions. This is a live session recorded in New York City with the Wynton Kelly Trio. This is a compilation. Most of the music is from this Wynton Kelly Trio session live in New York, with Wynton Kelly on piano and Paul Chambers on bass and Jimmy Cobb on drums. Though there's two tracks that also have Jimmy Smith on, quartets with Jimmy Smith, and Grady Tate on drums and Ray Barretto on percussion. That's one side of this. The other three sides are the Wynton Kelly Trio. This was really good. This came during his Verve era. And his Verve era started utilizing more pop and current songs, doing instrumental versions of them with strings and things like that. And the songs were shorter, so there wasn't much time for soloing. So a lot of people disown those albums. I understand why. And I wasn't interested in the later pop stuff. Initially from the Verve era and from the A&M, his last label that he recorded for was A&M Records. He recorded 3 albums before he passed away. And a lot of, not this album, but a lot of the Verve material started utilizing the orchestra and the arrangements. But they also had some Montgomery originals on them. By the time he went to A&M was a little bit more pop-oriented. And there wasn't any, the songs would be short 3-minute things. There wasn't time to really solo and stretch out. So those albums tend to get disowned by the fans. And when I first got into Montgomery, I didn't want to hear those albums either. And thankfully there was enough early albums that he recorded for other labels, Riverside specifically. The first major label that he recorded for was Riverside. And those were straight ahead jazz things, with 10 and 15-minute tracks and endless soloing. And that's the stuff that I ate up for years. The small band stuff, the long solos and improvisations. That's really all I listened to for years. And he started recording as a leader. I believe this is his first album as a leader, the Wes Montgomery Trio, which is his organ trio. And over the years, he kept on going back to the organ trio. which was Melvin Rhine on organ, who's that's the one guy that was always the constant in his organ trio. The drummers used to change around quite a bit. This album had Paul Parker on drums, but this is strictly, a straight ahead jazz traditional guitar organ trio. One of the first albums I bought, and this is a Japanese reissue of the original Riverside album. I bought this in, I want to say, about '79. This is a Japanese pressing. At the time, this album wasn't available. They reproduced the original liner notes and exactly what the original pressing looked like when it came out in late '59 or early 1960. At the time, you couldn't buy the American version of this in this format. I think it was part of a twofer album, but it had been repackaged with a different cover and different liner notes. And I bought this because I wanted the feel of that original album. So, like I said, I believe this is his first album as a leader. He did some recording in a group with his brothers and as a sideman prior to this, about 1957 and 1958. But I believe this was his first album. Maybe one of the reasons why I feel so close to him is the date this was recorded. This was recorded on 2 days in October of 1959, which October 5th and 6th, 1959. Okay, why does that mean something to me? That's 21 days before I was born. So this was recorded literally a handful of weeks before I was born in 1959. So maybe that's why I always felt close to Wes's music. Like I said, I believe this is his first solo album as a leader. Later on, and I'm guessing this is on compact disc somewhere, there's a compilation called Beginnings, which predated that. And this is a compilation from various recordings that Wes did, some with his brothers. 2 of his brothers were musicians as well. And some recordings he did as a sideman. These are from '57, which is a good 2 years before he started recording. I believe '58 is where, 57, '58, and even some in '59, which is the year that he started also recording, the month and the date, as a matter of fact, that he started recording as a leader. But these were all sideman things that he did. Like I said, with his brother and with other jazz musicians as a sideman or as a guest. And this is a nice compilation. His sound is a little bit different here in the early days. A little more trebly, not quite as warm. But this was an interesting thing. And I don't know how they've repackaged this for the CD era. I'm guessing this material would be available. But I don't quite know in what format, whether it's simply available with straight reissues of the original albums under the original artist's name. And here it doesn't list specifically what names it came out, the pieces came out under. But I believe there's, I don't know, the Montgomery Brothers sometimes recorded under the name the Montgomery Brothers, but they also recorded under the name the Master Sounds. So I don't know which came first, but there's also pieces here that feature other musicians that I guess Wes was a sideman of. But this was interesting for fans. This was interesting because it's a little bit different, a little bit more of a trebly attack, a little bit more maybe aggressive playing by Wes. But I don't know how this has been repackaged for CD. I want to look into that. So maybe it's because of that date of his first solo album as a leader coming out in October '59, the same month that I was born in, or being recorded in October '59. I'm sure it came out later. So, you know, for many years, and this is, you know, prior to the CD era, obviously, I would pick up anything I could find by Wes that I didn't already have. And a whole bunch of import records came out. And here's one of them. Now, this was $3.99 new and sealed. And all I knew is it says down in the corner that it's a live in concert thing. It's only got 4 tracks, so there's a 12-minute track, a 10-minute track, a lot of long tracks. It doesn't. There's no mention. This is the frustrating thing with this album. I thought when I opened it there would be some liner notes or something, but there's not. So there's no recording date. You don't know when it was recorded. and there's no musicians listed, which is even more incredible. I haven't played this for years. What I believe this is a quartet recording, probably live late 60s. Because even after he started putting out the pop albums with all the orchestration, when he toured, he pretty much toured with a quartet and played more straight ahead. And this is certainly a live album from what I remember. But very frustrating. I think there was another volume of this too. That also didn't tell you who the sidemen were or when it was recorded. So a bit, after years of listening to his, mainstream jazz works where, there's a lot of long soloing and small groups, then I got into, through hearing one track in particular, the version of Here's That Rainy Day, which is on here on this bumpin' record. And this is from the Verve period when he started expanding and getting backed with arrangements and orchestral strings and horns and that kind of thing. And really, it was hearing Here's That Rainy Day, that one track, the way the arrangement for strings works, and the whole track, which is done by Don Sebesky, that really made me listen. It made me turn around and start to listen to the more pop-oriented stuff. Though at this point, even though he had orchestrations on the album and he wasn't stretching out doing 10-minute solos, there was still a ton of jazz content on here, and the tracks that he was playing were not really, at this point yet, quite the pop songs. They were well-known songs and movie themes, but they weren't the pop songs of the day from like the 60s. But there was less stretching out. There was still a bit of soloing. But, the funny thing is nowadays, I don't know why, maybe it's because I have a new appreciation for arrangements and when they're well done. And Don Sebesky, to me, is just about the best. For some reason, this is the stuff I go to when I want to hear Wes, and I pulled out several albums the other night, and it was all from this era. It was all the quote-unquote pop music era, the stuff with arrangements and horns and strings. And I just really can appreciate the writing and Wes's playing on here. Like I said, I was even listening to the later A&M Records stuff, which doesn't leave him really any room for soloing, and yet I can still appreciate that for what it is, because the arrangements are so good. But even this stuff, the Verve era stuff, when they started doing the heavy arrangements and peeling back the running length of the songs, there was still some room for solos in here and things like that. And I when it's done well, it's just great. And for some reason, this is the stuff that I go to now when I want to hear Wes. The first thing I tend to put on is some of those Verve era stuffs, and even the pop things. So I was talking about John Abercrombie, and been thinking about him a lot as I'm waiting to see the documentary, and it just kind of made me kind of retrace my whole experience with him. In a way, he's one of those artists that I wish I could go back and rediscover, because he's so good, and because I bought what at the time that I got into him in '78, I really think that was about the best period for him creatively. And most of the things I was buying that had him on it were things that were fairly current to that time period, maybe a couple years old, up to the current stuff. And I lucked out because literally all of the things that I bought by John initially ended up being my favorite albums of his entire career. But here's where I first heard him, not on one of his own albums, but on Bar Phillips's Mountainscapes from I think it's 76. 76, March 76, where he only plays on one track. And he was invited by Bar Phillips and Manfred Eicher to improvise a solo on the last track on the album. So he only appears on one track. He does just a solo, and that's it. And you can tell it's improvised. And yet there was something about the playing that I liked so much that as soon as I heard it, I'm like, I got to go find some albums by that guy. So I'm not sure. I know the next two that I bought, I'm not sure the order. Maybe I even got them together, because they were the same. I bought them both at Disco Mat, and both for $5.49 each, which leads me to think I definitely bought them within the same time frame. So I've shown this before. So Gateway 2, which is my favorite Gateway album, I bought to hear more of John, and of course I got Jack DeJohnette. in the mix, and Dave Holland. This is my favorite Gateway album by far. Just bass, drums, and guitar, but it works for me. And of course, John's electric mandolin, who there's an improvised tune on here, 16 minutes long, that the album starts off with, called Opening, and it's upright bass, drums, and just mandolin. There's no guitar on there, so it's very interesting to hear that, the electric mandolin. And then John plays also some acoustic guitar on here, and actually the acoustic guitar is the other track on side 1, and the electric doesn't come out until side 2. Only 2 of the 5 songs, now that I look at it and I think about it, only 2 of the 5 tracks actually have electric guitar on them. The last track, Blue, which is a beautiful, one of my favorite compositions by Jack DeJohnette, where there's no drums, Jack plays piano, has piano, upright bass. John once again goes back to play the electric mandolin, and I'm pretty sure on that there's no electric guitar. I think it's just the electric mandolin, piano, and upright bass. Beautiful ballad, beautiful track. Well, I think one of the best things Jack's ever done. I got that and loved it. I think I got that before I got this, my favorite of all time John Abercrombie album, Characters. And this is his only all-solo album. I've talked about this a zillion times before, and I'll probably continue talking about it until I die. This is one of my favorite type of album is the album where a musician goes in and plays all the parts himself. There's nobody else involved in terms of musicians. And my tongue is getting the better of me here. I've always liked that concept of the one musician responsible for every single note that you hear, and in this case also all the compositions as well. But it's also kind of like a lonely album, and it's something to listen to on your own when you're on your own. It's probably one of the quietest things, if not the quietest thing he's done as well. Of course, because there's no drums. There's a lot of reflective, ballady type tracks on here. My favorite writing of John's is on here. There's a lot going for it. Now, just in the last year since his passing, it also makes me kind of feel, very melancholy hearing it, because, apart from Manfred Eicher, and I don't know how present he was during the recording of this, there's nobody that can talk about these sessions anymore. I always wanted to have a nice long interview with John Abercrombie talking about this specific album and what went into it and his thoughts, especially because this is the only album he did where he was the sole musician. So there must have been a lot of effort in there, and there must be a reason why he never did this again, never did an all-solo project again. And then, of course, when the musician passes away that does one of these all-solo albums, all those kind of secrets of that session are locked away. I mean, would the engineer, the guy who engineered it, remember anything about the sessions? That's very iffy, considering most engineers have done thousands of sessions over their lives. And unless the musician is a particular favorite of theirs, would they remember anything about the session? I don't know. And I always wanted to see John interviewed about this particular album and everything that went into it. And unfortunately, we won't get that now. But it's still, it's still my go-to John Abercrombie album. And my second favorite, which is also another one from Discomat that I bought for $5.49, that I bought somewhere roughly within that same time frame, is the duet album John Abercrombie and Ralph Towner, Sargasso Sea. Guitar duets are usually not my thing, so it's got to be something special for me to love it as much as I do. But in this case, you can tell exactly who's playing what on every single track, because they don't both play the same types of guitars. Ralph plays 12-string acoustic and the nylon string guitar, and John plays electric guitar, the electric mandolin, and on the maybe one track I think that he plays a 6-string acoustic, Towner's playing the classical guitar, so you can always make out who's playing what. And it's just, this was done just before the Characters album, and I maybe think that John listened back to this and really heard something special like I hear. just in terms of the atmosphere and the mood that the music evokes without having a rhythm section there. And I think that may have been one of the things that drove him to make Characters, which he did right after this album. It's a beautiful album. And this is one of my go-to Abercrombie albums as well as one of my go-to Ralph Towner albums. Definitely in the top 3 or 5 albums by both of those musicians out of their entire discography. Some interesting work that John actually did too. John did, Jack DeJohnette did the solo album where on 3 tracks he played all the instruments himself, and on the other 3 tracks he brought John in, and John Abercrombie duets with him on 3 tracks, and it's also a very interesting album from '76, and again part of Jack's group that John was for a number of years. This is a good one too, which I showed recently. I think this was a random vinyl pull recently. This is a quartet. This is Jack DeJohnette's band, New Directions, with the late Lester Bowie on trumpet, and of course John Abercrombie on guitar, and Eddie Gomez on bass. The great band now. Half of them have passed away. I was going to do somebody else, but the video's starting to run long. There's a lot of guitarists that I have that passed away that I love, so instead of me cramming in the last guy that I've got selected here, I'll just wait till next time. And with my speech impediment here too, it's slowing me down a bit. So, not knowing if this is going to fly again with this computer or with the webcam software or whatever it is, I'm just going to close out now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll come back and I'll do another one of these guitarists who I love who've passed away, or random vinyl pulls or something. I'll come back and do something of the nature soon. And thanks for watching, everybody. I'll be back soon. Take care.
Tune in next time for more
Tales from the Garage.